We stand together against racism.
Talking about racism, obviously we've seen in the Victorian Parliament, but more generally, it wasn't so long ago that we saw Pauline Hanson move a motion supported by most of the Liberal Party saying that it's okay to be white. The sort of message that sends about saying that actually what that is saying, it's okay to be racist. That's what that means. That's what they're sending out every opportunity they get, and any excuse to say that this was an administrative error is a complete disgrace, and it's shameful. I don't believe them. I don't think anyone believes the Liberals when they say it was an administrative error. They should have actually come out and condemned what they did, and they didn't, because they're part and parcel of pushing through policy after policy which is about demonising any migrant, refugees, Muslims, Indigenous people in this country. That's not going to win them the next election. We're going to make sure, because we're going to keep mobilising.
I acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my deep respects to elders past, present and emerging, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded on this land, and the fight for justice with our First Nations continues. I'm joined here by my Greens colleagues, Lidia Thorpe, member for Northcote, and Huong Truong, member for Western Metro. Huong Truong is the first Vietnamese woman elected to a Victorian Parliament. Lidia Thorpe, the first Aboriginal woman elected to Victorian Parliament, and the first Tamil elected to Australian Parliament. And we've been joined by Janet Rice, who's joined us on the rally this afternoon as well. And to all our friends in the rally, we say welcome and thank you for being here. Firstly, I want to express my deepest condolences to all those affected by yesterday's horrific incident on Bourke Street. To the family and friends of Sisto Malaspina, who lost his life, those injured, those first responders and bystanders who demonstrated so much courage in such shocking scenes, our hearts go out to you and we grieve with you. This will be a difficult time and a scary time for all in Melbourne. This is going to be a very difficult time too for our multicultural communities, as there are so many who will seize on these events to fan the flames of division, hatred and fear. I know at its heart that the Australian community, that the Victorian community is generous and welcoming. We glimpsed this firsthand when my family first arrived in Australia many years ago now. This country was different then. People seemed to be talking and celebrating multiculturalism and our identity as a nation. We were talking about land rights for our First Nations, but sadly I've seen us go backwards as right-wing politicians try and scapegoat and blame those who are different rather than welcoming and embracing them. We see some in the media and the right-wing extreme groups trying to pit people against each other for their own agendas. And that is why, especially at this time, we have to come together, stand together, support each other, and stand up against racism in all its forms, everywhere. The Greens have been the voice of opposition to the punitive law and order agenda that has gripped Victoria. Both Labor and the Liberals have pursued this agenda that has targeted our migrant and multicultural communities and people of colour. They have introduced laws and ratcheted up the rhetoric that we know unfairly targets our diverse communities. But the Greens won't stand by and watch that happen. We won't let it happen. We will stand up every single time and call it out. In 2 weeks' time, there is a critical election in this state that will decide the future of Victoria. We have to ensure that we get more progressive voices elected to the Victorian Parliament and more Greens elected. We need leadership in this state and country that stands up for multiculturalism, our First Nations, our rights to be equal and to be treated decently and fairly all the time. I call on Premier Andrews and Matthew Guy to have the courage to stand up to those right-wing extremists, those shock jocks and parts of the media who want to fan the flames of division and fear. Thank you. each and every single one of you for being here today, all the organisers who have made today happen. This is what power and solidarity across the political spectrum looks like. Let's keep doing this. The Greens will always stand up against racism. The Greens will always stand with each and every one of you. Thanks, everyone.
Building a campaign against racism on the basis of unity. Any of the serious, significant struggles against racism in this country have been fought together, and that's an important thing that we're going to have to take forward. Because if you look at the polls, if you look at where Scott Morrison is at, he's not popular, and what they have to rely on is the only thing that they've got, and that's racism. And we're going to have to continue to mobilise, and we can't do that alone. Right, we're going to need hundreds more people here next year when the federal election comes. We're going to have to build deeper roots in our unions, in our workplaces, everywhere to say no against racism, to push it back, and to say that people have a right to be here, no matter what your skin colour, no matter what your religion, no matter what your race. It's a very simple point. It's a simple point, but it's lost on these people because they are so blind by their hatred, so blind. So it's very important. Sign up to stand up against racism. Stay in touch with the campaign. We're going to keep fighting.